Mike Winger claims that we bypass the Bible because of bad logic or rules we force on our interpretations. He says that many people hold views about women because of philosophical beliefs, that people can be committed to beliefs before even consulting the scriptures. And it's so true. People have such strong ideas about women before even considering what the Bible says. Because Mike and I are in complete agreement on this fact, I'm going to use this as a springboard to show you how our early church fathers, theologians, and Bible translators were already biased against women, already entrenched in the patriarchal culture, already believing in the teachings of philosophers like Aristotle, and how those pre-existing ideals about women caused them to interpret the Bible. Many of these men did not learn their views of women from the Bible, but brought their ideas from their culture, from their backgrounds. All these ideas about women they brought into Bible theology. I will present compelling evidence illustrating the previous bias, vilification of women, and the deep-rooted misogyny expressed by esteemed figures from the early church and renowned theologians whose influence continues to be highly regarded today. Everyone is biased. No one is free from bias. We would be foolish to think that culture and bias could not have influenced theology or Bible translation. Numerous Christian men take pride in the fact that they rest upon the legacy of their church fathers embracing nearly 2 millennia of church history. They find reassurance in their beliefs by clinging to tradition, assuming that the longevity of shared beliefs somehow guarantees security and truth. We should be wary of such security and trust in tradition. It did not bode well for the Pharisees, who were so stuck in their ways that they couldn't see Jesus as the Messiah. What happened to trusting Scripture alone? Since when do we trust in tradition and men? How many people actually study these men of history to see their character, their bias, and how they arrived at their beliefs? What if I were to tell you there is proof that these men that we actually elevate were heavily influenced by their culture and that ungodly ideas about women seeped into theology and Bible translation? Would it be so surprising? Given the view of women throughout history, only 100 years ago, some women were even allowed to vote in this country. Have we forgotten history? Have we forgotten the dismal views and the treatment of women? Let's take a moment to go back into history. Let's look at the evidence. Let's look at how the world influenced theology and Bible translation, history of culture, and of the church. Guys, this is so important for us to know what our early church theologians believed. So these are all of the ones that we're going to look at. We're going to try to get through them quickly, and I promise this is going to be worth your time. We're going to look at the early church fathers here: Tertullian, Origen, St. Jerome, John Crysostom, St. Augustine. Here is just some of the influences on their writings. We have Neoplatonism, Aristotle, Stoicism, asceticism, Christian monasticism, Origenism, Greek philosophy, societal norms, and patriarchal culture, including Greek and Roman mythology. So let's look at Tertullian first. Do you know that you are each an Eve? The sentence of God on this sex of yours lives in this age. The guilt must of necessity live too. Woman, you are the gateway to the devil. Tertullian expressed views that emphasized the subordination of women based on the order of creation. He argued that because Adam was created first, women are inherently subordinate to men. It's important to note that hierarchical views and the natural order of creation was also part of the cultural belief of Roman society at this time. This does not necessarily reflect the intent of God's creation in the Genesis account. Roman society was structured around the relationships of subjects to rulers, wives to husbands, and slaves to masters. Tertullian's writings indicate that man was made in the image of God while woman was not. He believed woman, taken from one of Adam's ribs, was a second kind of human being. It's important to note that numerous beliefs and teachings of Tertullian were rejected by contemporaries or later regarded as heresies. Tertullian believed that even after the death of a spouse, remarriage was wrong. Other rejected ideas include adoptionism and the denial of bodily resurrection. If you don't know what those are, you can look them up. He argued that marriage is considered to be good when it's compared with the greatest of all evils. He also believed that marital desire was similar to adulterous desire. He believed that sex, even in marriage, would disrupt the Christian life, and that abstinence was the best way to achieve the clarity of the soul. Now, Tertullian's views would later influence much of the Western culture. Tertullian was the first to introduce a view of sexual hierarchy. He believed that those who abstained from sexual relations should have a higher hierarchy in the church than those who did not, even those who were married, because he saw sexual relations as a barrier that stopped one from a close relationship with God. Tertullian also expressed the opinion that because women's hair and faces were so tempting to men and could cause men to stumble, that virgins should veil their own faces. Now, Origen, he attended a Neoplatonic academy in Alexandria. Neoplatonism is Greek philosophy that puts creation into a hierarchical framework. This contributed to his belief in the hierarchy of God, the Son, and the Spirit, putting Jesus in a subordinate role under God and the Spirit under Jesus. Now, Origen was attacked in his lifetime, suspected of adulterating the gospel with pagan philosophy. After his death, opposition steadily mounted. The chief accusations against Origen's teachings are the following: making the Son inferior to the Father, and thus being a precursor of Arianism, a 4th century heresy that denied that the Father and the Son were of the same substance, spiritualizing away the resurrection of the body, denying hell, speculating about pre-existent souls and world cycles, and dissolving redemptive history into timeless myth by using allegorical interpretation. He said, men should not listen to a woman, for it is improper for a woman to speak in an assembly, no matter what she says, even if she says admirable things or even saintly things. That is of little consequence, since they came from the mouth of a woman. He also said, what is seen with the eyes of the Creator is masculine and not feminine, for God does not stoop to look upon what is feminine and of the flesh. So here, women is viewed as lower than men, that God would not stoop to look upon her, and equating her with of the flesh. We have St. Jerome. He said, woman is the root of all evil. Now, St. Jerome translated the Bible into Rome's official language, Latin. This is where Bible translations started to change the meaning of verses concerning women and their relationship to men. Hundreds of years of bias against women and the Roman culture finally starts to corrupt the biblical texts. By the 3rd century, Platonism had become very spiritual. Neoplatonists taught that embracing the hierarchical order of nature would help them move closer to God. Not only was the philosophy part of the culture at that time, but Jerome was heavily influenced by Origen. He thought Origen was the greatest teacher of the early church after the apostles. While Origen didn't fully embrace Neoplatonism, he did incorporate the ideas of hierarchy into the Godhead and in human relationships. And this did affect his understanding of the Bible and translating the Bible into Latin. John Chrysostom, "The woman taught once and ruined all," he says. "On this account, therefore, let her not teach. But what is it to other women that she suffered this? It certainly concerns them, for the sex is weak and fickle," and he is speaking of the sex collectively. "Man was formed first, and elsewhere he shows his superiority. God maintained the order of each sex by dividing the business of life into two parts. He assigned the more necessary and beneficial aspects to the man and the less important inferior matter to the woman." Oh, this is very similar, this idea here, to what complementarianism is today, except it's separating into roles. And yes, it is still assigning the more necessary and beneficial aspects to the man and the less important inferior matter to the woman. We've just spiritualized it, guys. We just call it something different. Instead of saying men do the superior and women do the inferior, we just say, well, we have different roles. And the women are assigned in their roles to the inferior, while the men are assigned in their roles to the superior. They are the ones leading. They are the ones at the head. They are the ones going to seminary. They are the ones whose spiritual gifts and roles are more important. Men are not encouraging women in the same way they encourage men. The leadership of men is held up, as the important thing. Women going to seminary, women getting theological training, that is not as important. What is important and what is elevated are the assignments of men. Hearken about the women of old. They were great characters, great women and admirable. Such were Rebecca, Sarah, Rachel, Deborah, and Hannah, and such there were also in the days of Christ. Yet did they in no case outstrip the men, but occupied the second rank. There is an obsession with these early church fathers into putting people into ranks, into making the woman secondary, into making the man first. There is an obsession with this. Why is there an obsession with this? Why is there an obsession with hierarchy? Understand that this is the cultural norm. This is the philosophical beliefs of this time, to put everything into a hierarchy, to put everything into rank. St. Augustine, here's some great quotes from him. "I don't see what sort of help woman was created to provide man with, if one excludes procreation. If woman is not given to man for help in bearing children, for what help can she be? To till the earth together? If help were needed for that, man would have been a better help for man. The same goes for comfort and solitude. How much more pleasure it is for the life and conversation when two friends live together than when a man and a woman cohabitate." Again, I don't know if you can see the sexism in this statement, but it is clear that he does not understand the value of the woman, the value that she brings in companionship. He doesn't see it. Another quote here. "Woman was given to man, woman who was of small intelligence and who perhaps still lives more in accordance with the promptings of the inferior flesh than by superior reason. Is this why the Apostle Paul does not attribute the image of God to her?" So he doesn't believe she is in the image of God. "The woman together with her own husband is the image of God, so that the whole substance may be one image. But when she is referred separately to her quality of helpmeet, which regards the woman herself alone, then she is not the image of God. But as regards to the man alone, he is the image of God as fully and completely as when the woman too is joined with him in one." So he's saying the man is fully in the image of God on his own, but the woman is not in the image of God. She is only in the image of God when joined with her husband. "Watch out that she does not twist and turn you for the worse. What is the difference? Whether it is in a wife or a mother, it is still Eve the temptress that we must beware of in any woman." One thing to be aware of is that Augustine was a very troubled man. He admits to having an uncontrollable appetite for women. He had mistresses, even lived with one for many years, fathered a child, and still refused to marry her. He admits not being able to tell the difference between love and lust. It's not surprising considering his own personal struggles and view of women as more like obstacles to be avoided. The problem is Augustine's experiences are his own, and his own darkness, biases, and personal struggles are not representative of all people. It's possible to project one's own problems onto others, even the entire church. It's easy for men like Augustine, whose own evil desires arise out of unbridled lust, to project that evil onto innocent women. Throughout the Confessions, the language Augustine uses to describe his sexual impulses is negative, reflecting images of disease, disorder, and corruption. Desire is mud, a whirlpool, chains, thorns, a seething cauldron, and an open sore that must be scratched. Desire for Augustine is almost a compulsion, an irrational impulse that he feels incapable of controlling without God's help, a bondage that he is too weak to escape. Desire becomes the last obstacle between Augustine and a complete commitment to God, because he is certain that he cannot live a celibate life. Guys, there's nothing wrong with not being able to live a celibate life. If you want to be married, you should be married. You desire a good thing. But for him, not being able to do that was not being able to completely commit to God. Now, with the influence Augustine still has on the Western Church, it's no wonder why desire is vilified. The early church fathers have had a lot to do with viewing women as temptresses and trying to annihilate human desires. The value of women is misunderstood, and the confusion between lust and love continues today. St. Augustine was a brilliant mind for sure. He was charismatic and with a voice ringing out louder than all his contemporaries. He made the biggest splash. But that doesn't mean his is the voice of reason or one that we should heed. His quotes reveal that he did not understand God's purpose for women. Let's move on. Thomas Aquinas, 13th century, it's a bit in the future here. He says, "But woman is naturally of less strength and dignity than men." Now, Aquinas agrees with the philosopher Aristotle. As regards the individual nature, woman is defective and misbegotten. You see, Aristotle believed that women were defective human beings. They were just defective men. They were deformed. And if they had fully formed, they would have been men. So women were viewed as a lesser creature, a deformity, a problem. And then he also says that woman is naturally subject to men because in man, the discretion of reason predominates. Martin Luther. For woman seems to be a creature somewhat different from man, in that she has dissimilar members, a varied form, and a mind weaker than man. Although Eve was a most excellent and beautiful creature, like unto Adam in reference to the image of God, that is with respect to righteousness, wisdom, and salvation. Yet she was a woman. For as the sun is more glorious than the moon, though the moon is a most glorious body, so woman, though she was a most beautiful work of God, yet did not equal the glory of the male creature. You see, these men of history are obsessed with putting the man as a superior over the woman. We are better than women. We are more glorious. It's very interesting seeing these ideas of these men. Another quote from Martin Luther. "If a woman grows weary and at last dies from childbearing, it matters not. Let her die from bearing. She is there to do it. The woman is made to serve and obey the man, and this obedience is part of her very nature." Let's move on to John Calvin. Regarding the first post-resurrection appearance of Jesus to women rather than to men, so this would be right after Jesus' resurrection, he appears to women at the tomb and not the men. He says, "I consider this was done by way of reproach." So he thinks that God just chose the women to reproach the men, because they, the men, had been so tardy and sluggish to believe, and indeed they deserve not only to have women for their teachers, but even oxen and asses. Yet it pleased the Lord by means of those weak and contemptible vessels to give display of his power. So women are contemptible vessels, not the ideal. The ideal was men, and God chose women just to rebuke the men for their sluggishness to believe. It's a pretty sad view of women here. He says, on this account, all women are born that they may acknowledge themselves as inferior in consequence to the superiority of the male sex. Yes, that is why they were born, that they may acknowledge themselves as inferior. He also says, there is no absurdity in the same person commanding and likewise obeying when viewed in different relations. But this does not apply to the case of women who by nature, that is, by the ordinary law of God, is formed to obey. For the government of women has always been regarded by all wise persons as a monstrous thing, and therefore, so to speak, it will be a mingling of heaven and earth if women usurp the right to teach. He therefore commands them to remain in silence, that is, to keep within their limits and the condition of their sex. Also, he says, now Moses shows that the woman was created afterwards in order that she might be a kind of appendage to the man, and that she was joined to the man on the express condition that she should be at hand to render obedience to him. Since, therefore, God did not create two chiefs of equal power, but added to the man an inferior aid, the Apostle Paul justly reminds us that of that order of creation in which the eternal and inviolable appointment of God is strikingly displayed. Now, this is a gross misuse of Scripture, guys, and we are going to really jump into Genesis and show you that God did indeed create two chiefs of equal power, and that woman was not an inferior aid, but an equal, but a powerful ally, not an inferior aid. Let the woman be satisfied with her state of subjection, and not take it amiss that she is made inferior to the more distinguished sex. These guys are obsessed with making themselves superior over the women. Man's empire is over women, for it is fitting that women should be under man's protection, and that they should be his helpers, not his companions, not his equals. Little helpers, little inferior aids. This is the view of John Calvin. John Knox. Now, John Knox has some pretty misogynistic quotes, but I'm just going to show you a couple. Woman in her greatest perfection was made to serve and obey man. Nature, I say, paints women further to be weak, frail, impatient, feeble, and foolish, and experience has declared them to be inconstant, variable, cruel, and lacking the spirit of counsel and regiment or leadership. So, a few words about these men. It is important to note that many of these men mentioned did have good things to say about women too. Not everything they had to say was bad. Their views on women were often contradictory, switching between the worst kind of evil attributed to women and then praise of their virtues. Even so, this does not undo the harm done by attributing such derogatory things in the name of God in the Bible to their entire sex. Such stereotypes are beliefs that come from culture, philosophy, and inferring things that the Bible never actually states. It's reading between the lines, seeing things that aren't there because of previous bias or belief. Or also they're exaggerating or twisting of Scripture. We can easily see from these quotes throughout history that women were silenced because they were viewed as inferior, less than, and according to some, not even made in the image of God. Translating the Hebrew as rib instead of side has also caused views of women's inferiority, rather than saying that she was created from a side of Adam, a half and equal counterpart, she is often referred to as just a rib, or like some of them said, an appendage, in the most derogatory way. The idea that man being created first somehow made him superior goes back at least to the time of Tertullian, and we will examine this claim as well as others in the coming videos and podcasts. Almost all complementarians and egalitarians have rejected the church's historical view of female inferiority and have embraced women as equals of men, made in the image of God. It's also important to note that some of the teachings of these early church fathers are now considered heresies or misinterpretations. This should cause us to examine for ourselves other teachings they taught rather than holding so tightly to the security of church history. Just because they were wrong on some things doesn't mean they were wrong on everything. However, I think it's clear to see they were wrong about some things, including their views on women. Please subscribe and click the notification bell so you can be alerted for our next video as we continue to look at church history and beliefs on women from the 1500s to the present day. This is Laura from Divine Dissident. Please check my description for links to my website and links to my Patreon where you can support this ministry. I'd love to continue doing the work that I do, but I need your help to do that. Thank you, and we'll see you guys next time.